In the same kind of way as John started us out, I do want to explicitly recognize that the land we gather on here at UNC Greensboro has served as the site of meeting and exchange amongst a number of indigenous peoples, specifically the Kiawe and the Sara tribes. And so it is good to recognize these things and our kind of role in the colonialist practices that are still taking place today. Welcome. I wanted to share a little bit of thought work that I've been up to over the past few years around evaluation as a reflective practice. And so I'm just going to go ahead and jump in because I want to make sure that I have time for people to share their own thoughts on this topic. All right, moving you around on my screen here. Okay, so what is our purpose and agenda for today? So I was thinking about this last night in preparation for the session, and I think the really big purpose that I want to kind of speak to is that we need to take space, and to take that space specifically to think about our profession and how we uphold our responsibilities in practice. So what is it that we say evaluation is all about? And then what does that look like when we are actually doing evaluation work, boots on the ground? And so I want to start by sharing a little bit about what reflective practice is and kind of a little bit of a brief history of what reflective practices look like, as well as what it looks like in the evaluation world. And then I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about how to view evaluation as a reflective practice. And then maybe there will be some time for us to do some reflection and dialogue and share out a little bit as we can and talk a little bit about implications for the field at the end of the session. So, what is reflective practice? I have grown more and more fond of this quote as the days have gone by. So reflective practice can be looked at as a state of mind, an ongoing attitude of life and work, the pearl grit in the oyster of practice and education. It enables us to make illuminative sense of where we are in our own practice and our relation to our profession. And so that metaphor of that pearl grit, it's the dirty work that we're up to. It's acknowledging that we need that pearl grit in order for the pearl to occur in the first place, right? So reflective practice was actually born as an explicit rejection of the sentiment of professionals as mere technicians. So if we go back to the work of John Dewey or Donald Schoen or even other scholars that are in the indigenous space and otherwise, we see that reflective practice kind of is hoping to kind of reject this idea. It's an antidote for the excessive reliance on technical rational expertise. And I also want to say that I come at reflective practice, and so does SCAFE 2010, and myself and Tom Archibald. We've got a chapter coming out in 2023. We view reflective practice as a subversive activity. So it's not about maintaining the stasis of our profession or about the stasis of the services that we are in. It's more so about rejecting the status quo, or at the very least, questioning it, right? Just because we have done things this way for so long doesn't mean that this is the right way to do things. And the opportunity for reflective practice is the opportunity to say what's really going on here and what could be going better or differently moving forward. Okay. So what is reflective practice? I really love Roger's depiction in 2002 of Dewey's perspective of reflection. So she distills reflection into 4 criteria as it relates to Dewey's perspective. So first, Dewey thinks that reflection is a meaning-making process. It moves a learner from one experience into the next with a deeper understanding of its relationships with and connections to other experiences and ideas. It ensures the progress of both the individual and ultimately society. And I think it's really important to point to the fact that reflective practice is a means to essentially moral ends. It's also a systematic, rigorous, disciplined way of thinking with its roots in scientific inquiry. So it isn't just us armchair thinking, although we can armchair think, and that is a form of reflective practice. Oh, excuse me. All right. we really want to do it systematically, and we want to make it an intentional part of our practice. And I love the connection to scientific inquiry here, because if you think about the scientific method, it's about trying and failing and then trying again, right, in order to learn from our practice. It also needs to happen in community, in interaction with others. I believe in reflective practice as a collaborative effort. And I think that if one of my dissertation participants said, if you're only reflecting by yourself, it's like you're swimming in your own sweat. Your boundaries are the boundaries of your reflective practice, right? And so it needs to happen in community, in interaction with others. And it requires us to have an attitude that values the personal and intellectual growth of ourselves and those that we are around. So what does this thing look like, right? It means that we practice intentionality. We bring things out into the open that perhaps we may not be super excited to bring out into the open for the good, for the common good, right? Or for our own growth as professionals. It bridges theory and practice. It says just because we have some textbooks that say that things are supposed to go one particular way, or we have a logic model that says that things are going to go one particular way, does not mean that that happens in practice. And so we have to deal with that false dichotomy of what happens in theory and what happens in practice. It helps us to ask good questions. It helps us to inquire further into our own and others' beliefs, right? Which means that it challenges our assumptions, biases, ideologies, beliefs, and behaviors. Hopefully, if we're doing reflective practice right, we're engaging and valuing multiple and diverse perspectives, and we're giving voice to those who may not have had a voice in order to really learn from that diversity of opinion and belief. It engages uncertainty and puzzling situations. So if you know anything about Donald Schoen's work, he talks a lot about how the reflective practitioner runs up against a number of surprising events and puzzles in their professional life. And our ability to deal with those is kind of the point of reflective practice. Again, what happens in theory and what happens in practice are two separate things. It also accepts ignorance and mistakes as a part of our practice. We all don't know everything. We also all make mistakes. And we live in a society where the perfection is expected of us. And we are also expected to know everything as experts in our field, right? And so really kind of removing that barrier in our reflections is important. It also builds awareness and attentiveness to context. So what's going on out there that affects me? And what's going on out there that affects the projects and the work that I'm on. It requires us to be curious, humble, and authentic in our work and in our sharing. It's a political and social responsibility. If you're not reflecting on your practice, you're being perhaps complicit in our societal responsibilities. And it's also the reason why it's called reflective practice is because it's concerned with taking action. Reflective practice is not reflection, not completely undertaken unless we are actually taking action on the basis of our reflection. So just briefly, I wanted to share Schoen's kind of conceptualization of reflection. So Donald Schoen talks about reflection in action and reflection on action. Reflection in action is our ability to pivot and be flexible on our toes in the moment. You can think about it as improvisation or jazz improvisation skills. We have to really kind of hone in the moment, see what's going on and see how we're being responded to and act accordingly. And that's kind of an artistry more than it is a pre-planned series of actions, right? There's also reflection on action. And like I said, you can armchair think. So I did put this here. But I think that it's about sitting back, thinking about what has happened, what hasn't happened, what went well, what didn't go so well, and kind of thinking about how we can move forward based on something that has happened in the past. I think this is kind of in some ways a false dichotomy because we do both of these things probably all the time in kind of an iterative cycle. Couple of cartoons just to keep us awake after lunch or before lunch here. I think that the honing in on the fact that this is a practice is really important. So the left-hand cartoon here says, how do you draw so well? It's practice. The other person says, it must be an innate gift from God, right? And the other person's like, no, it's practice. And then the person says, I'll never understand how some people are so talented. It's a mystery. And then our artist says it's practice, right? It's really important to note that anything that we do requires practice, and reflection is not it's not omitted from that, right? And also, as myself and Tom Archibald have written in the chapter that's going to come out in 2023, we see reflective practice as bringing us into a practical wisdom category. So there's knowledge, there's theoretical knowledge, etc., right? There's like knowing things from different parts of our experience. But we really want to be able to make these connections and be able to kind of pivot and understand accordingly in practice. And we see that as the practical wisdom that comes from the reflective practice experience. Of course, creativity is super important there too. So I want to switch gears and think about evaluation practice briefly. So Dollar Larson says that evaluation is a child of the rationalist belief that by the use of reason, including systematic investigation, we can rationally improve social arrangements. I think the challenge here is to see evaluation and reflective practice as more than just rationalism. It's a more holistic understanding based on numerous kinds of knowledge rather than just rationalism. So what does reflective practice look like in evaluation? Reflective practice and evaluation crops up in a number of different places. It crops up in our evaluator competencies, which were first kind of launched off by the American Evaluation Association competencies. Were first launched off by the Stevan et al. 2005 article on essential competencies for evaluators and evaluation. At that time, it was actually a separate component of the evaluator competencies, and since the American Evaluation Association has kind of established competencies for our profession, it actually kind of got moved into a little bit more of a professional practice domain, and did not have an explicit competency associated with a competency domain. We also see it in organizational learning and evaluation capacity building. How do we develop people's ability to learn in organizations and develop their capacity for evaluation? Well, it's through evaluative thinking, which I also have on this slide, right? And so getting people to reflect on their own performance and behaviors and really understand how evaluation can help us to do that is another place where you see reflective practice kind of crop up. We see it in systems and complexity in evaluation, such as Gates in 2018 and Ulrich in 2000. We see it in a number of evaluation approaches, including King and Stevan's interactive evaluation practice, Patton's developmental evaluation, or Patton's utilization-focused evaluation, and then even Trochim and Urban's recent work on relational systems evaluation. We see it as a component of decision-making and a way that we can make better decisions as evaluators in practice. We see it as a component of good teaching evaluation, getting our students to reflect as a part of learning about evaluation. Like I said, it also crops up as an evaluative thinking piece. There's kind of an intricate connection between reflective practice and evaluative thinking that has been written about a few times, and including the article that Tom and I have coming out in 2023. And we also see it as a component of reflexivity in evaluation, right? Being kind of that bending inward on ourselves and thinking about our own positionality as a part of evaluation. From my dissertation research, I did interviews with 19 evaluators with 10 or more years of experience in evaluation practice, asking them about their thoughts on reflective practice. And I was able to come up with a definition on the right-hand side of the screen. So it's an iterative process of thinking and questioning, self and contextual awareness, focused on learning and improvement for both the evaluator and those involved in the evaluation. So we see two kind of components of reflective practice kind of crop up in this definition. There's reflective practice for ourselves as professional evaluators. there's also this idea that we need to facilitate reflective practice in our clients and those that we work with in evaluation. So that kind of pivots us to thinking about evaluation as a reflective practice. If you're interested in learning more about evaluation as a reflective practice, there's a bunch of different citations here that kind of help us to ground ourselves in this idea. But again, myself and Tom wrote in the upcoming chapter, evaluation itself is a reflective practice. It's a special form of reflective practice that utilizes evaluative thinking to arrive at a judgment about the merit or worth of an object. The goal of this evaluative judgment is to further our collective practical wisdom. So evaluation as less auditing against criteria and more the act of acting, reflecting, learning, acting anew, and then going through the cycle all over again. Schwant says that evaluators' principal focus should be to help practitioners acquire the ability to deliberate well, to assist them in developing their own wise practice. And of course, if we think about the mirror metaphor, we as evaluators need to be so well versed in our craft that we can take that mirror that we've crafted back to our clients for them to look through in a way that reflection helps provide further pause and further opportunity for envisioning what could be in their projects, programs, etc. So how do I incorporate reflection in my evaluation practice? So I take intentional space in weekly meetings for reflection on other meetings, events, data, and findings. And those reflection spaces in weekly meetings either include evaluation team members or even my clients in the reflective process, right? I build reflective practice into data collection tools, sometimes explicitly. Let's engage in reflection dialogically and collaboratively, and then use that as data on the back end for my evaluation, right? I have critical conversations with clients and evaluation team members about things that need to be addressed, even if they might be tough to talk about. And I explicitly identify reflective practice as a value of evaluation work, capitalizing on the human component of evaluation. We're all humans, we're all fallible, and we have to show our clients and other evaluation team members that we are also humans and have informal communication and conversations about our own lives in order to ground our work more effectively. I just saw a question in chat. I will give you these slides so that they'll be available too. So some blocks and limitations to practicing reflection. I think these are kind of the key to the conversation that we should have today. First is inexperience at imagining others' experiences, right? So that idea of empathy and being able to say, put yourself in somebody else's shoes could help, it could block or limit our ability to practice reflection. Not knowing how to express our reflective narrative. We don't really understand how we can communicate what's working, what's not working, and kind of bear ourselves in that way. We might also fear incompetence, judgment, or ridicule. And evaluators are in the business in the first place of judgment, right? So we come in often with clients thinking we are there to judge them or to audit them. And that fear is real when we try to think about reflective practice in evaluation. We could also be tired. We live in a society that's about checking boxes. And particularly, we were just talking about this with my students earlier today. In the United States, we are go, 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 no time to reflect. We're overworked and we just keep adding things to our pile of things to do, which means we may lack time to really engage in the reflective practice process. We also might lack motivation. Why do I need to reflect on my practice? Nobody's asking me to do so. Why do I need to engage my clients in reflective practice? My job is to count these beans or establish these indicators, right? And maybe the topic is too heavy, touchy, or sensitive for us to engage in that space with our clients or with ourselves. So, like I said, I want to not talk at you forever. Instead, I want to kind of pitch some questions out to the group for reflection. And so I'd love for us to engage in collaborative communication today through kind of dialogue. And as you may know, David Bohm wrote a book called On Dialogue. This is not from that, but he is one of the gurus in the dialogue space. And he says dialogue may well be one of the most effective ways of investigating the crisis which faces society today, and indeed the whole of human nature and consciousness. Moreover, it may turn out that such a form of free exchange of ideas and information is of fundamental relevance for transforming culture and freeing it of destructive misinformation so that creativity can be liberated. So I want to create an environment today with you all of reflection, openness, questioning, humility, vulnerability, curiosity, responsiveness, and ultimately collaborative learning. So I want us to really think about these 7 aspects of collaborative communication and the idea that when we come together to talk like this, there's a 1 + 1 = 3 situation that happens, right? So collaboration means that people labor together in order to construct something that did not exist before the collaboration, something that does not and cannot fully exist in the lives of individual collaborators. So 1 + 1 = 3 in that sense, right? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So what does that mean? It means that we need to build a climate together, right? Create a welcoming environment and develop trust among us. And if we had more time, I would love to spend more time in that space. I love that there's a round table in person where everybody can kind of see each other and bump shoulders together. We also need to be questioning, right? Asking open-ended questions, asking questions in order to dig deeper in others' perspectives, inviting others in if they haven't contributed to the dialogue, and asking back, which means that if Lori asked me a question, I could answer her first, obviously, and then ask her, why did you ask, Lori? And then I would learn more about how her thinking led to us having this conversation in the first place. We also need to be listening, and that means listening with the intent to be influenced. Listening for assumptions and beliefs, values, and tracking the conversation as it unfolds. So what are we really talking about here, right? We also need to be thinking, considering our own assumptions and beliefs about evaluation and about reflective practice or other things that may come up. Using self-messaging to say, oh, I'm thinking too much about my own perspective and not hearing other folks. So suspending assumptions to be present in the moment. And of course, focusing, making connections to what other people are saying, and posing focus questions, like what are we really talking about here? Where have we been and where are we going? And then finally, acting and facilitating. We want to engage in that reflection in action and on action, as well as facilitate by reinforcing these behaviors together and enabling conditions to create the dialogue space. One of the things that my advisor in reflective practice said is that y'all got to brace yourselves for this. We're all little efforts, which means that we're all little facilitators. And even if there's one person that's guiding the conversation, such as myself today, we all are kind of responsible for that facilitative capability in order to move the dialogue forward together. So here are my questions. These are questions that I came up with over the past couple of days. And I would love to just hear whoever's moved to speak to kind of share, and we can kind of engage in a dialogue. I think that we had talked about having the in-person folks kind of hang out together and having the online folks kind of hang out together as well. Well, here are my questions. What would it look like for an evaluation to be engaged in as a reflective practice? And how might that practice look different because of that framing? Maybe you're thinking of a time in your work where you saw evaluation as a reflective practice. What did that look like? What are the practical implications of this reframe for ourselves, our clients, and society more broadly? What are the barriers, personal, organizational, societal, or otherwise, to seeing evaluation as a reflective practice? And what practices should be front of mind in order to practice evaluation as a reflective endeavor? So I'm going to pop these into the chat box, and we can chat here, and y'all can chat in the in-person space. Does that sound good? John, you
Hey,
want to help?
Tiffany, this is Lori. Do you want it? So we can talk in the room. We'll put you guys on mute. So can you give us like how much time so we know when to regroup?
Yeah, I love that. So maybe we could do 15 minutes of chatting and then come back together and do some share outs before we finish up.
10 minutes sounds good.
All right, y'all. So I am very curious to hear what folks are thinking. We can throw these questions out all together, but I thought it would be good to kind of have some prompts to guide our dialogue. Who feels moved to speak at this stage?
I can go ahead and kick us off. I feel a little bad because Tiffany and I actually talked about this last week, but I am really interested in diving more into this idea of like, what does communal reflection look like in practice versus an individual reflection? So not necessarily those practices individually of like journaling or responding to prompts, but really doing that as a group. What kinds of activities has anyone engaged in or wants to engage in that would really do that communal reflection, collective reflection?
I can share a little bit. So as a new emerging evaluator, when I was in grad school, I worked with the career services unit on a department-wide logic model. And to accomplish that under the guise of strategic planning, we split up the 3 individual functional areas within career services and had them have conversations. And one of the groups was our career development specialists who did all the career advising and the career appointments. They did all the educational pieces. And it was really interesting talking with that group as they were identifying activities and things that they want to learn. Because as a group, they were thinking about how each of them ran their meetings and how they follow up with students. And then also talking about should we have consistent messaging across the board, but really reflecting about what their experience looked like in the role, and trying to figure out how to improve students' experiences overall as a team. And so I thought that was really unique because they started identifying different tools that they would need and assistance from the other functional areas that would just improve their practice. And so we came together as a large group to talk about the final logic model after that semester. They started seeing a lot more where silos existed before. They no longer had to exist for them to continue to work across with each other. And I thought that was really interesting because they shared with me that that was the first time they ever were really able to reflect on why they were doing the work that they were doing and how they were actually a part of it and had the agency to change just by collaborating and talking with one another. And so I think that that was a really interesting experience with this reflective piece of how are you involved as an individual in a system, and then how does that system look with your colleagues and trying to, work towards a common goal. So yeah.
I'll just say something. Hi, I'm Peggy. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. From my experience, I just feel like we sort of, like you said, and when we're engaging clients or whomever, we're always doing this. We're always sort of doing it for ourselves and trying to understand where their people are situated in terms of their understanding of the world or outcomes or whatever it is you're doing. So I kind of like always going even further back, and I like referring to the different approaches in terms of paradigms. And I find that's very helpful when you're looking at people, and because some people are just not going to engage in reflective practice. I mean, you know, we've all been in front of one of those people. As much as you try, you'd have to be very skillful because they're just so completely, I'm interpreting reflective practice as being able, you know, like what you were conveying in terms of, you know, stepping back and looking and understanding. But a lot of times people are very black and white. And I guess that would be a question that's arising. Like, what do you do in those? I guess it's okay. Or, you know, what do you do in those circumstances when you know that you probably need a little bit more from somebody or from a client in terms of what they're asking, and yet they just can't get there. So how do you deal with that barrier?
I sometimes work with Lissa, and I'm just thinking about your question of how to like systematically incorporate this. And I'm thinking, you know, it depends on the project, but like for, was it webinars? We have like a reflection sheet. Like if you had an annual reflection sheet, I don't know if this would get at some of the deeper level issues, but it could just be a place to record your thoughts at least, like, you know, annually, maybe when you submit a report and thinking about what you do differently for the report, but also like how you engage with the clients and participants, making basically just a place to record your thoughts, maybe, you know, at a regular interval, whether that's related to annual reports or not, just to sort of start facilitating that process. Again, I don't know if that would get at some of the like the really deep reflection that would need to happen, but it seems like it would be useful. I wonder, Peggy, how you feel like that relates to your question about the barrier.
Again, I mean, it's an interesting idea, but then if I'm thinking about being in the shoes of someone who isn't reflective, and they'd say, well, yeah, okay, you know, so what? Like I could journal, I could do this, I could collect. I've worked with a group where we had people like that, and it was a fine, yeah, that could work for some people, but for those people, yeah, I mean, it would be a lot more work to get them to actually either buy in, or maybe that's not what they're going to do. Maybe they're just, I guess you have to sort of transform their inability to reflect in a way that could move forward the collaborative process for the rest of the group to reflect and move forward in terms of what they're trying to do, because they could become a real barrier if they can't and if they won't. So I guess it's a lot of dancing around people's egos, really, and just trying to figure out who they are. And I mean, I'm just thinking back at one example where I had a situation where we had somebody who was really solid, and it came to the point where our collaborative group, they were yelling at each other, and it was really uncomfortable, really, really uncomfortable. Now I'm Greek, so I was used to the yelling, but after we got back to that, we got past that process, something really meaningful happened, and that person didn't necessarily want to reflect anymore, but they valued and respected that other people wanted to. And he went off and became really successful in what he's doing, which is really cool. But it was painful. And so I guess I'm just thinking that, you know, those individuals in situations where people aren't reflecting, rather than shutting down, saying, well, you can't do it, which is what I started off with. Maybe you need to go through those painful things and actually, if you're ready, because if you're not ready to hear someone yell, then, you know, don't do it. But if you're, or get upset, but if you are, and you're equipped to, you know, be seated yourself and understand that the storm that's around you isn't a reflection of who you are, it's a reflection of someone else, then I guess you can accommodate whether someone's reflective or not. So anyway.
I wonder if others have thoughts on Peggy's thoughts or the story she shared about this, about this yelling match. You know, I'm wondering, I feel like I often think about in terms of like resources to help facilitate this. I'm thinking of like, Tiffany, if you could develop this
resource that has, just some common questions people could think and reflect on, but also this like really direct sort of statement that says, like, basically, if you can't think of anything you could have done differently, like, you're under a false assumption. Like, there's something you probably could have done differently. And like, if you don't think there is, like, kind of the problem to you, like something that's really direct, but also encourages people to reflect. But I think that that's like what Peggy's bringing up is a really good point.
I also think it's like a really good reminder that change is uncomfortable, and we oftentimes see that process with our clients, but reflecting back on us as the professional experiencing that, it almost sounds like Peggy, the person you were working with, was just really caught in the change process of learning how to be reflective.
One way that oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Cody.
I was gonna say one way that I've thought about this is like through, and this is in the situation of like a grant funded project, but doing project leadership interviews with like PIs and not framing it as just we're going to reflect, but just framing it as I want to talk about your project and talk about the goals that you've set for the project and how that's going and what kinds of strategies you're using, and start there just to talk through those goals. And whenever I feel like I can, offering suggestions for how they can deal with problems that come up, and not framing explicitly as like we need to do this reflective process, but more kind of like a just talking about the project in a general sense and problem solving and suggestions for how things can improve. That's worked well for me where I've gotten to the end of an interview like that, and then at the end of it, the person will say, "Wow, that was really helpful to go through all the different aspects of the project that we said we were going to do and pursue, and actually just take some time to think about it and think about how that's gone," because I don't think a lot of people typically do that for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about today in this session. So I think that can be useful to not say we have to do reflection, but talk about it in a more general sense.
Great points, Cody. Honestly, a big challenge we have, I know you mentioned time on your slide, and in a lot of programs where everybody is short staffed and we're just constantly trying to move forward and fill these gaps, that it's hard to make it something that people want to come to the table and do, for them to find value in being reflective right now when there's so much that is obviously obvious, but some of the obvious challenges are right there in front of you. It's hard to bring them to the table and be reflective and try to think of, how would this be of value of them without, I guess, in a way, trying to like forecast what the reflective session will result in, so that they can see that there might be something that would help them with their current challenges without trying to make sure that that's all the conversation is about. We don't want the conversation to be just about these are our challenges.
Related to getting input, someone had told me that they usually sent out a survey after an evaluation was conducted to their client to get input on, how things could be improved in the future. And I think that that is something that would be really helpful and a thing that I keep saying I'm going to do, but haven't done.
I just want to add, I do like the word artistry that you used, Tiffany, when you were talking about this, because there is a quality of that as well. I mean, when you're coming to the table, whether you're taking a very general perspective or whether the person's coming with something else that you need to identify, whether it's from your own bias or their bias, and use it as a way to move forward what you're working or doing with them. It's art.
Yeah, I'm glad you resonate with that. I can't take credit for that. That's been around in the reflective practice literature for a little while, but I do think that sometimes it really does come down to an art and kind of an intuition too. how to go forward accordingly based on what we know and what we're seeing going on. I wonder what others, oh, Lori said they're back. I wonder if anybody feels like they could wrap together all of our conversation and help to share out. I don't know, can folks hear us in the room? I feel weird, like there's this privacy thing. Okay, all
We can
right.
hear you.
Perfect. All right. So is there, maybe we start with the in-person folks so y'all can ruminate on who's going to share out for us in the virtual space. But those who are in the room, maybe you can start with kind of just a recap on what pearls came out of your reflections and dialogue over the past 10, 15 minutes.
So this is Lori. Hi, everyone. We talked about how it seems really critical. Well, I'm paraphrasing and putting words in everyone's mouths, but talked about the value of this and the importance of it. And there's really no barrier to just doing it, you know, with it individually or in your team of evaluators. But it does become challenging when in terms of engaging the client at this level, because sometimes it's just all you can do to get a meeting together, you know, to get major decisions about the evaluation done or to review results or anything. And so to try to add this on to already stretched schedules is a challenge. And then something that I shared just was, and I think it might be from the chapter you're working on, is I can't remember where I heard this, but just the importance of being aware of what we're learning through the evaluation process, even when we're the evaluator, because we tend to think so much about what the client or the participants are getting out of it. How are they using it? What are they learning? What are they doing differently? But I think with every experience, we also have those. We learn something new about the context, about our practice, about ourselves, about others, and maybe don't take sufficient time to kind of reflect on that and think about the impact of each evaluation experience on ourselves as professionals and just as people. So I'll invite others to, you want to add anything else, Val?
Yeah, I was just going to add, Tiffany, I think one thing that is that I appreciated is that you mentioned thinking about the organization within the community context and things that they might be dealing with. So viewing reflective practice as something that goes beyond the self to other as well, I think is a nice way to look at it too.
Yeah, that boundary spanning piece that that Hazel Simonet talks about kind of comes up for me, Val, when you say that. It's like it's not just about giving the top the answers, it's about really understanding what's going on at the bottom and what's needed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to Lori, your point, I think that oftentimes evaluators can get in a space of, I don't know if I'm being too brash or hasty when I say this, but like a holier than thou, like I am this judger that comes in, I don't need to do this work on my own. But really reflective practice is about change starts with the self, right? Really understanding that we are fallible ourselves in our evaluation practice, and meta evaluation, whatever that ends up looking like in the future, is really key to us really further developing and performing well for our clients. I also think it's really cool to be in the space of thinking about reflective practice for the client and reflective practice for the evaluators being not so separate. For the same points that Val was making, is like, how can we further hone our practice on the basis of what's really going on in context with these clients, as opposed to some sort of like accountability feature that's happening. Maybe it's both things at once, but really thinking about those two parts of the reflective process that we're either facilitating or engaging in ourselves as not so much of a mutually exclusive series of reflective practices. I don't know if that made sense. I feel like I just got rambly, so apologies. But all right, any other thoughts from our round table in the room there? All right, well, we'll pivot back into the virtual space. Who wants to share about like what were the main things that came up in the virtual space around these topics?
Could I could I just make one point? I think I'm someone who enjoys learning from reflection, and I would think I'm not the only person in the room who feels that. But it does occur to me we're probably a highly biased sample. And so in terms of summarizing our discussion, I think when we talked about people who don't like reflecting and it's difficult to get them to reflect and so on, I think we tended to characterize them in a very negative way. And I reflect on my own life and sort of professional life, and also playing sport as an amateur sports player. I'm certainly aware that some of the people I work with manage to learn and develop without particularly wanting to reflect. And so I think we need to recognize that they bring something. It's not clear to me that in a project or a team or whatever, reflective practice is obviously a very valuable thing to have. It's not clear to me that that necessarily implies that every single member of the team has to be doing it. That's a kind of further step in the argument. And I would also add, in terms of when I say I think I feel we're almost inevitably biased. Sometimes people have very good reasons for not wanting to reflect on something. You know, and they think, no, I'm going to move on. I'm not going to move back. So I think it needs a more kind of rounded conceptualization.
Yeah, Anthony, I appreciate that point. I like the idea that maybe there's a space to be had for thinking about when it's inappropriate to engage in the reflective process. Because I agree with you, there are places where, gosh, it's just not going to be useful for you or the person who may be engaging. I was talking with a student, it's been years and years ago now, about like rumination and analysis paralysis as it relates to practice. So like it's the dark side of reflection, right? Like when it gets to be too much, or when, to what end am I really picking apart this situation? And I think we need to acknowledge that there are spaces where reflective practice is not helpful. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Our online folks from the dialogue that we had, anything to share? I'm particularly interested in some of us highlighting a couple of the topics today before I move on and share my closing slides. I'm gonna play like nose goes. Okay, all right, y'all. One of the ones that I really appreciated was really thinking about what if somebody, well, it kind of goes with what Anthony was talking about in some ways. What if somebody is just not, like they're a wall. There's no reflecting this person wants to do. And this idea that it could turn into a shouting match, and like how do we engage, or how do we really kind of come back from those sorts of experiences? And I think one of the things that I didn't say during our session is that I think that all problems can be boiled down to problems of communication. And so I really believe that part of the evaluator's job is to be really effective in their communication and in their conflict management skills. And sometimes we may end up with that client that just doesn't budge. And at that stage, well, there's not really much we can do about it, but in some ways it feels like our responsibility to help that person engage and communicate and hopefully educate them to the value of truly reflecting on what's going on in their project or their situation. Any other pieces from our online folks that they want to share about our dialogue? All right, well, I know that we're getting close to time here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again real quick. So I wanted to share a couple of, so Tom and I, this actually comes directly from Tom Archibald and I's chapter on, it's called Reflective Practice, Evaluative Thinking, and Practical Wisdom. And so in our chapter, we're practically bringing those three things together. And I'm making sure y'all can see my screen, right? Thumbs up. Okay, good. So we talked about some implications for practice around that practical wisdom space, because in reality, I feel like evaluative thinking and reflective practice are kind of part of the conduit that gets us to be more practically wise in our practice. So what does it mean to view evaluation as a reflective practice, or to think about reflective practice as kind of the bedrock of what it is that we do as evaluators? Well, I think it first of all means that we need to embrace relationality, and really think, kind of like we were chatting about with Lori, and this idea of meta evaluation and turning our reflection inward is like there's a need for us to be relational together and really have these dialogues and deliberations together, embracing the relationship and the fact that we're all connected. We also need to understand our context, the context that we're operating in, the history that we're operating in, whether that's societal, whether that's in the particular project that we're evaluating, or whether that's our own context, right, as our positionality. We also need to hone our intuition. Practice, in order that reflective practice becomes more of a second nature kind of opportunity for us and a more intuitive part of how we operate. We need to engage values explicitly as opposed to implicitly, right? Act with humility, knowing that we don't know everything, and being curious in that space, which maybe some of our clients have a little bit of a problem kind of adapting that mindset. We need to keep local knowledge, like Val and I were chatting about, at the forefront of practice, like not privileging ivory tower or expertise ways of knowing that we often come to the table with. And instead thinking about everybody is coming to the table with their own lived experience and local knowledge. Remembering the subversive nature of evaluation, and the idea that we are naturally, our jobs is to challenge the status quo. And then facilitating and practicing reflection is a part of effective evaluation, both for ourselves and for our clients. And that does mean taking time. And I don't have any solutions for you other than, gosh, can we push back on systems and society so that we have more time to engage effectively in our work? So thank you so much for coming and spending an hour with me. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share in these last 4 minutes. If you would like to reach out to me, feel free to email me, and that's my Twitter handle there if you want to follow me on Twitter.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I'm going to invite folks in the room to give a real round of applause, and maybe the people online.
So if you're online and you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask Tiffany any questions you have. Thank you.
Can you tell us what book you mentioned, a chapter you're working on with Tom? Tell us what book that's going to be in.
I'm pretty sure it's called Practical Wisdom for an Ethical Evaluation Practice.
Nice.
It is edited by Marta Hurteau and Tom Archibald, and it's Information Age Publishing.
Great. Cool, thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much, Tiffany, for joining us today, and thank you all for your participation. I'll be sure to register for the next Café when we'll be joined by Professor Martin from the Center for Native American Studies, Northern Michigan University. We'll be presenting on indigenous data governance the same time next 2 weeks. Yeah. Thank you so much for attendance. Have a nice evening and a nice weekend. Bye-bye.